Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome back to another episode of Theorycraft Thursday. For those of you who are joining me for the first time, Theorycraft Thursday is a weekly series for the upcoming collectible card game, Total War Elysium, where I will be diving into certain gameplay or design topics, and this week we are going to take a look at the major patch that came out for October, where a brand new general, Davout, has been officially introduced in the game, along with some new cards and a slew of balance changes. So let's jump into game and take a look at all the changes one by one. Now the first thing we're going to take a look at in game is Davout himself. So this is the new general. He is a 0 attack, 30 health general from the French Republic faction in the Empire era. And we can see that his passive ability is once he has 9 cards in hand, all allies on this line will get +1/+1. This is actually a very interesting mechanic, as I have tested out the deck a couple times, as this can technically heal you should you be below your maximum health of 30. What I mean by this is, let's say we are at 0-15, we're injured. Then we get our 9th card in hand, we go to 1-16. And then I play the 9th card, and I go down to 8 cards, losing this bonus, and we'll be left at 0-16 instead of 0-15. Because the +1 on health, similar to how it worked with High Ridge back in the day, is the health is added to your total health pool, and when it's taken away, if you happen to have below your maximum health, you don't actually lose that health. So you'll end up at 0-16, and if you can draw another card, you can repeat this process to heal yourself back up. That is actually something quite interesting, and probably a very hard to deal with mechanic in terms of how much control you have on that aspect, but it is something that perhaps developer could look into fixing, or at least make it more consistent, as High Ridge can no longer do this. Now moving forward, we have his signature card called the Iron Defense. Now this is a very simple card for 2 costs. It will deploy a palisade on your front line. And if you look at the cost, this is one issue I have with this card. The card itself costs more than the palisade card. And Palisade costs 1, add a 1-2 structure in the front line, and in a sense this is not very worth, especially considering the fact that Palisade can be spawned using an event card that actually costs 1. So if we jump into a deck structure of see what cards available to him, we can quickly scan through and see the card Stockade, which we have featured in our Maria Antoinette deck before, and this is an event card that will give you 2 Palisade in any lane that you want, for the price of 1, which is definitely a lot better than the cost structure of Iron Defense, considering the fact that you have less control on where the Palisade goes, and it actually costs more than the Palisade itself. Now of course you could argue that Signature card is special because it refreshes in your hand every turn, so if you make this cost 1, it's a lot easier spam, but Palisade has a lot of drawbacks. If the enemy have a ton of cavalry, or any sort of way to bypass your front line, whether through short range, long range, or cavalry, then Palisades are nothing more than decorative slots that will crowd your front line, limiting the number of units you can actually play. Therefore, it can backfire on yourself by spawning too many Palisade. So I think lowering this cost actually make a lot of sense. Or perhaps it should allow you to pick where you can place your Palisade, just in case that you want it on the back line to protect your flank. Perhaps allowing you to place the Palisade onto the line will also help. Now there's a lot of things that I feel are issues for Davout, so if you're still on the fence about getting him or not, I feel like in the current meta, he will struggle mightily if you're trying to build a structure and range deck, as cavalry will easily wipe you out, and you really need to face another very slow control deck to shine, and in the current aggro heavy meta, it's going to be very hard to see him succeed. Now, I have brainstormed a few ideas for him that is not the traditional structure and range deck, as I feel with his high health and potential for surviving into the mid game, there is a possibility of playing some sort of camouflage deck for the French Republic, which has always been an interesting idea that I have not been able to successfully create, but I feel like he has some potential, and perhaps we will see that in one of our deck showcases very soon. But that's pretty much enough about introducing this new general. We'll see him surely in one of the deck showcases in the future. And moving on to what other changes are in the patch, there are actually some major changes in terms of rewards. If we pop into reward, for those of us testing closed beta right now, it's been hard to motivate us with these gold coin rewards to play daily. Well, they're changing that. In addition to missions, if we pop over to rewards, we can see that it has been slightly refreshed. It's hard to tell from the beginning, but you can see that you get legendary cards now. I'm already past that point, so I won't be getting that. But for new players, there's more ways to actually build out your strength instead of previously just getting gold coins, which can only be converted into battle packs, which gives you only common and rare cards. Now you can see periodically you'll be rewarded directly with an epic card or with a legendary card sometime even. And if we keep scrolling to where I am currently at, which not too far away, is right here. We're at 47, about to be 48. Coming up is quite nicely one epic and one legendary card, and they also rebalance some of the reward. Epic pack coming at 52, and I believe there's a legendary pack somewhere in here too, a battle pack, another battle pack, which is basically 1,200 gold, another epic card, and so forth. So they're trying to encourage players to come back to play the game, of course, and once you're past 75, the gold becomes 2,000 a level, which is wonderful. And Amorous, which is another topic we can talk about. There's now going to be more ways to gain Amorous as they added more achievements in terms of tiers. So now We Band of Brothers has the 5th tier of 4,000 units being played, 4,000 events being played, and there's also 4,000 units destroyed, which I believe I already finished. Yes, it's the Bell Tolls theory, destroy enemies. It also has gone up to 4,000, and that's the top tier, so tier 5 would be the final one. I checked it once the patch came live and claimed that one, and that gave us, I believe, the same amount as these. So let's see how many, 400 Amors, I believe. No, 1,000. So tier 5 is 1,000, so that's a quite nice boon. Oh yes, we did get 1,000. I spent 700 to get Davout unlocked, and that's another welcome change. In addition to those changes to encourage players to play more, inside the store we can see that aside from daily missions, there's also going to be daily items for you to claim every day. It'll be random rewards, and it'll just get you a little incentive to come and open up the game and queue up, as the queue has also been rather difficult to find new players. In addition to these setup, there's also going to be seasons introduced starting October, where we'll have our first rank season, and with each rank tier level up, you'll also be able to earn some Amorous, and that you can spend them on the new packs. Now, they're not technically new, they've just been rebalanced. Epic pack has been nerfed in terms of crafting materials rewarded, and Legendary pack has been buffed in terms of crafting materials. So it has been rebalanced, where Legendary will tend to be much better than Epic compared to before, when we did the math in a previous episode of Theorycraft Thursday, where I claim that it's better to actually get epic battle packs, and given the rework to legendary cards to make many of them more relevant, and we'll be able to see some of those buffs in this episode here, I believe legendary battle pack is definitely the way to go now. All these balance changes are very welcomed. And moving on, if you can still buy your general here, Davout will be here if you're opening up the game after the patch for the first time. Moving back, the main bulk of the patch changes, of course, are new cards and some of the changes to existing cards, so we'll be spending a lot of time in collections. Let's first talk about the new cards. I haven't opened any packs since the patch, nor have I crafted any, so they will all be inside of the crafting section. And the first card we see is this card called Blindside. So let's pop it open. This is a timeless event card that will cost 1. And this reduces the attack of a target enemy unit or structure to 1. This is a very interesting card in my opinion. It costs 1, but it's clearly designed for late game use, because there's nothing in the early game that is worth blindsiding. But there is also no time restriction on it, as many of the stat reducing cards in the game has been given till daybreak, like Demoralize and Lay Down Arm, which is rather balanced given how strong they are in the early game. This card, on the other hand, is clearly a late game card used to eliminate giant threats that the enemy can put out, and it's going to be very effective if you run into those giant threats. Against weaker or combo decks, this is less effective. And the developer have said that they're trying to move into stronger legendary and late game cards in order to allow those cards to overpower some of the mid game setups in terms of combos that's happening right now and dominating the meta. So perhaps when that happens, Blindside will see some play. And moving on, we have another new card in the Gorakus, and this is actually a very interesting card for the Empire faction here. And what we can see is that this is a camouflage unit. So camouflage units will stay camouflaged until you attack with it. You can move camouflage units without breaking camouflage, which makes the second part of this card very strong, because every time you move this card, you will gain 2 attack. So this is very powerful in that you can have this card building up in strength as you move this card back and forth in the early turns, and once it gets strong enough, you attack the enemy. Now of course, the health will never get increased, it will always stay at 3 unless you boost it with one of the camouflage boosting cards in the Empire era. And that's why I had the idea of potentially Davout being able to survive the early game onslaught with his 30 health, could play some sort of camouflage deck with this card as one of the main features, as a surprise damage in the mid game once you turn it on for yourself. In the early game, you can survive behind a weak wall of palisades and just rely on your health to build up strength. So this is one option. And moving on, we have another card here for the Trojan faction. They actually got another new card in Ritual Sacrifice, and this is very strong in my opinion. So on the surface, this card asks you to destroy a target ally, and your general gains its attack this turn. This is very good in both aggro decks and Pentathlea decks. Now the reason for this is, for aggro decks, you can essentially turn one unit into a double attack this turn. This is a Trojan card, so only the Trojan generals would be applied, and the only generals that would use this is Pentathlea or Agamemnon. Priam are not going to be doing the attack, so he is not going to really sacrifice an ally to gain its attack this turn. Of course, you could surprise someone with a very high damaging structure that you have boosted, and you destroy the structure. It could be a very simple palisade, and all the attack transfers to your general, and Priam leads the charge into the enemy, smashing them in the face and winning the battle, because structures themselves can't attack. So that is a possibility, but not one I think this is designed to do. For aggro decks, let's say you're playing Agamemnon. You trigger your ability to have a short range attack by playing something on an empty lane. Perhaps it's a Minotaur with its 7 attack, and the Minotaur goes in, hits the enemy, and that 7 attack is done. Then you use this card to kill your own Minotaur, transfer the 7 damage onto your general, making Agamemnon 8 damage short range for 1 turn to crush whoever wants to take the 8 damage, because you can hit them anywhere, because you can move Agamemnon with Voyage. So that's a very strong finisher. And then on top of that, if you're playing Pentathlea, sometimes you have your card set up with the Shatter effect from Blood Oath. Maybe it's a Headhunter card that you have built up the attack for through your passive ability that increases attack at the beginning of every day, or maybe with the Bronze Worker. And then you kill your own card, which spawns another Headhunter, and then you also transfer the initial damage from the Headhunter, perhaps after it attacked, onto Pentathlea herself, and then she leads another attack. So this is a great card for aggro decks, because you are adding so much damage to the enemy. Imagine a 3 damage Headhunter. It's been nerfed to 2 now, but you can easily buff it to 3, playing as one of the Trojan faction. It will do 3 damage itself. You would destroy it, doing 3 damage directly to the enemy general, and then those 3 damage will be transferred onto the general of your choice, Agamemnon, Pentathlea, depending on which deck you play, and then those extra 3 damage will be applied to the enemy general for 9 damage just by using Ritual Sacrifice. And if you happen to be playing as Pentathlea, your Headhunter is going to respawn from Blood Oath giving you potentially another 2 damage on the board that's unavoidable. So this is a very scary card in my opinion, and definitely deserve to join some of Penthelia and Agamemnon's deck, especially if you're playing aggro. And aggro is actually getting buffed surprisingly with all the new cards. As you'll see, there's another card that I'm really scared of that's going to come up very soon. So very interesting card and very strong. And moving on, we have another new card down here, which is a card I've been mentioning. It definitely strikes fear into me, and that's the Strike Fear card for the Viking factions. This card is an event card that costs 2. All enemies will move back. If your hand is empty, any that moved will take 2 damage. This is insane in my opinion, because first, it's not very clear what all enemies mean, because it kind of implies that all enemies include structure, which would be nuts if the enemy are playing any sort of frontline structure for stalling, because you can push those structure back, which is something that you cannot do in the game so far. And if that's not the case, you can still use this card as a very strong top deck, or even as a delay card in a non-aggro deck, where you can buy yourself a turn by pushing everything the enemy have to their backline, as they have to spend the action next turn to move them back. So this card has so many uses. If I play this in a no-hand Lagatha deck, I wouldn't take this on day 1, because on day 1 my purpose is to get rid of my hand, and this does cost 2, so it kind of bothers me that it's not going to be easy to get out of your hand. But if I top deck this from day 2 and beyond, I will be so happy, because there's the potential I can use this to deal 2 damage to everything on the opponent's board, potential to push back their structures potentially. I'm not saying that this can do it, because I don't have the card, I haven't tested it, but from the wording, it suggests all enemies. It doesn't say structure or units, and obviously it would include the enemy general. That's why I think they chose the wording of all enemies. I don't know how the code works for structures, but if it can push back structures, this card will be so scary. And even if it can't, it's 2 damage to everything that gets pushed back, and it will buy you another turn to build up Lagatha. So this is insane. I feel like this card is definitely going to get nerfed. And if you're thinking about climbing the ladder once the season comes out, definitely open up your Lagatha aggro decks again and try to craft this card, which I think I'm going to do, because I feel like there's so much potential here given how strong Lagatha already is, and now it's even stronger with this card. And then moving on, we will see another new card that's very scary for aggro decks, for Trojan decks, which does not need help, and this is the Dreadbringer, which is a common card. It's a 3 cost, 2/3 unit with Shatter that adds a Dread Host to your reserves. So it's a card that's meant to die. At 3 cost, 2/3 stat, I feel like it's actually decent, given that it has additional effect, of course. Because if you think about it, when you play Messenger, the old Messenger, because it also has been changed in this patch, you're paying 3 for 2/3 to pull a card from your reserve. In this case, you're paying 3 to play this card and eventually add a card to your reserve. And you can go aggro with this card because you want it to die. The enemy can't do anything to this card. Currently in the game against Shatter, the only thing you can do is force you to return the card back to your hand or back to your deck, and neither options really solve the problem, especially when the card only costs 3. So for Ancient deck, this feels like an auto include, because at 2/3, getting a 5 cost 10/10 added to your reserve, which I know does not directly impact the game, but assuming Dreadbringer comes out on day 1, which it should, giving 3 cost, then on day 2, you can go grab this Dread Host. Now of course, assuming you don't get the Dread Harbinger killed on day 1, perhaps you can't get the Dread Host on day 2. But let's say you get it killed on day 2. You can pull Dread Host on day 3 and try to get it out through your deck, draw it, and if you draw it, then it's kind of game over. I don't know what solution, or at least what effective solution there are against a flat 10-10 unit that only costs 5. There's nothing efficient. There's no one card removal that costs less than 5 or even 5, which makes it very efficient. And the fact that Dread Harbinger is a common card means you can draw this card over and over again from your deck and shatter it over and over again to add a legendary card over and over again into reserve. Feels ridiculous, because you're not just dealing with one Dread host, you can potentially deal with one Dread host per day. That is really tough, and I believe this card definitely needs some change, and I don't understand why this card's introduced. And this is definitely a great card for aggro decks once again, or even mid-game or late-game decks, because it allows you to not take a card into your deck building process that's designed for the late game, as you have a very consistent way to spawn such a unit that only costs 5. So very scary card right here. And then if we move on from that, we can see a few changes in terms of the patch balance. We're not going to talk about the stat change just yet. We're just to keep looking at new cards, and we have the Pirateers. This is a card added for the French Republic, and we can see here it has a shatter effect that adds a supply cache to your hand. One correction, this is an Empire card, I believe, with the cannon symbol. So this is shared between any potential future factions aside from French Republic. Right now we only have French Republic in the Empire era, and this is definitely one of the cards they try to design for Davout, as he wants to build up his hand. So you like cards that are hand neutral, as in whenever you play a card you could potentially get the same card number back, and this is definitely one card that does that. Now of course I don't think it's restricted to Davout decks, as it's fairly statted at 4 cost for 4/4, and you can always use a supply catch. So very simple card, nothing too crazy about this. And then we have Camel Nomads, which is an interesting card in my opinion. It reminds me of some other card games, but this basically allows both you and your opponent to redraw their cards. You will shuffle your current hand into the deck, and then you'll draw that many cards. Now this on the surface doesn't seem that fancy, but you have to factor in one other card when thinking about this card, because let's say this is a 5 cost cavalry. Let's say you played, let's get to, well, we'll find it. It's a 4 or 5 cost, I can't remember, but I think it's 4 cost perhaps. That would be on curve, but maybe it's a 5 cost. It's a 4 cost. It will be on curve. If we play the Mounted Brigand on 4, flanking, whenever the enemy draws a card, this gains 1 attack. If this is on your board when you played it on 4, and then you play this on 5, you are forcing your opponent to give your unit stats, because you're forcing them to redraw their hand. So each new card they're drawing to replace their current card is going to buff your unit. And that feels insane to me, because that's such a great combo. Now of course it requires you to have both cards in hand, but this is one of those very fun combos where on the surface this card by itself looks pretty harmless. You want to redraw, there's certain chances where you're not going to get the card you want, and in the late game if you don't have the combo, could this be good? Well, depends on what you're playing. If you're playing a deck where you are trying to build up your hand size through cards like Vineyard, or if you're playing one of the new deck with Davout, you might have a bunch of round shots. Then in that case, if you want to upgrade your hand from those kind of useless cards into high quality cards from your deck, instead of bringing out more draws which might burn your hand as you continue because you have likely a close to full hand, you can use this to just swap out your kind of useless card for more useful cards, and you have more option that way. So it could still be very useful. But I feel like there's a lot of ways to build Davout. We just need to see a little bit more card. Right now there's just not enough in my opinion. At least I'm kind of pigeonholed into building him like he's designed to, with a frontline wall and some backline range. But I feel like perhaps there's other ways. Like this potentially could be one way, as both of those cards are timeless. So any deck can run this combo. It's a very fun combo, so I actually highly encourage people to do that. And if you're using this in Empire, you can also put the supply wagon out, and then you're technically drawing your hand again. And each time you draw a card, you gain a supply. and that can also double or triple your supply depending on your turn, because you can spend 5 to do this, and if you happen to have 5 cards in your hand at the point, then you can get 5 costs back and you can play more cards. So there's so many potential here with this card. I feel like it's very underrated. This type of effect is very fun. And then moving on, there's more new cards. We had 8 added in, I believe, and some of them are changes to current cards, which we'll talk about later. Right now, focusing on new cards. The Brave, which is an event card for the French Republic, costs 6, and it will deploy 3 new units called the 18th Liga. And these units are not short range despite the fact they're holding a gun. And what they are 2/2 camouflaged daybreak units that will gain 1 attack on daybreak. The key here is they're camouflaged, which I think is probably their saving grace, because by themselves they're not very useful. You are paying 6 to get 6 costs worth of cards here, so there's no cost benefit either, and the fact that the Brave costs 6 kind of prevent you from using it during the first day. So you're not going to enjoy that daybreak benefit until the second day at the earliest. Now, of course, there is one possibility where you start out second, so you start with a supply cache, and then on turn 2, you play the supply wagon on curve, on turn 3, you play the vineyard on curve, then on turn 4, which is still day 1 for you. No, if you started second, turn 4 is no longer day 1 for you. So in that case, you still can't enjoy it, because if you turn 4 is only day 1 for the player who starts, so you won't have that initial supply cache. So there's technically no way you can play this card on day 1. So in that sense, you can't get the benefit on your unit until day 2, which I feel like is rather late to have 3/2/2 unit throughout day 2, when your opponent could have many ways to clear a line or clear your board. So not very effective. And that's kind of my opinion on this right now. It's an epic card, not going to be on top of my list to craft. Perhaps there's better combos, I'm not thinking about it. I've been thinking about camouflage cards. Of course, you can boost all these to 4/4 with the camouflage buffing card, but I feel like that's still too late. You're using this potentially as a day 3 type of power spike, and I just don't know if you need it at that point. Either you already have board control, or this card's not really going to swing things in your favor. So that's kind of my opinion on this card. Moving on, we have a new card called War Clerks, and they are 6 cost units, 1/1 timeless, that has a Herald. Gain +1/+1 for each card in hand. So when would this be good enough? When you have 6 cards in hand, including this, by a turn where you have 6 cost. The second you play this card, you have 5 cards in hand, and this will become a 6/6 War Clerk on turn 6 using 6 supply. I don't know if you consider that efficient. And the maximum this card can get is to become 12/12, because max hand size is 12. This has to be one of the 12 cards, you play it, and you're down to 11 cards, making this a 12/12. And that's obviously great, 6 cost, 12/12. But when is that going to happen? When are you going to be at full hand with this card in your hand? It must be a scribe deck. It must be a scribe deck that runs a lot of vineyards and supply catches, and only in that situation you might have a full hand, and then you have to be careful not to burn this card as you draw near full hand. And that's often the drawback of scribe decks, because you could sometimes burn the card you need. So I feel like this card feels good on paper, but it's not that strong. In most cases, it will underperform, and once again, as an epic card, not really looking forward to using materials to build this. So another card that I'm going to look past. And then we just have a few changes. I believe there's no more new cards at this point, and we can move on to talking about the changes themselves, which includes cards that I own and do not own. So we'll go by them through the list of the patch note. So let's do that on the main page. Not here, but here. So the first group of changes are to late game cards that they want to have stronger power. So that includes cards like Cataphract, which used to be a 8/7 unit at night cost with flanking, stun, and shield. Very strong in my opinion. But now it's 8/8, so it's a slight buff to health, My question here is, why the 1 health change? Because I don't think the reason he was seeing less play is that he had 7 health. I feel like the reason he was seeing less play is because he's too high cost. He's a great card. I don't know if reducing the cost will make him better, or not better, but see more play, or fair or balanced in all senses. I don't know how exactly to balance this card. I feel like he has so many great effects that once you play it, if you don't have an instant removal, it's super hard to remove him. You need target removals. You need just something that will kill a unit directly, because he has shield. So tricks like injuring your unit and then using the ancient card, I forgot what it's called, the 3-cost card that will kill all injured units. No quarters, right? No quarter. No quarter will be very ineffective against him because the usual trigger is some sort of blot out the sun that will deal 1 damage. In this case, he has shield. And since he is a flanking cavalry that has stun as well, range units can't really kill him either. And he's very punishing once he starts attacking you. So if you don't remove him on the turn where he doesn't have fast, where he just got played, he's going to do a lot to you. And this obviously helps, but I don't know if it's going to sway my opinion in terms of deck building. He has to have a place in the deck, and I just don't know if he has one. And aside from him, we have changes to the Dutch Blue Guard, which is a card that I do not have, but we can look here. This card now gives a Daybreak bonus that doubles the actions of your other units. This is a Daybreak bonus, so this can happen multiple times, and it's not increasing action, it's double action. So all units have 1 action in the beginning, first double will be 2, and then the next day it will be 4. So this could be very strong if you can keep your units alive with these bonuses. And obviously this will be great in any sort of range deck. It has a lot of potential, but I don't know if you can currently build a deck around him either. The cost is a little high. His survivability is also a question. And the other question is, what card would you be looking to boost the most? And how would those cards survive? There's a bunch of questions to be asked. Now, of course, there's a tons of cards I can think of that could benefit from getting double action. Almost every card can benefit from double action, range card in particular, because they never have to trade their health. But it's just hard to see how this will work out at this cost. And this is something we have to keep taking a look at, because this is one of the new changes. Used to be giving the entire line plus 1 action until the end of the following turn. It's a Herald and Daybreak ability on him. Now it's just simply double action, which needs some time to be seeing how effective this is. Then moving on, we also have a change to Inspiring Champion, which is a card that I have, and this is just a stat boost. It used to be a 2/6 unit. Whenever this deals damage, units on this line gains its attack this turn, so his attack. But he can help you boost the whole line only when this deals damage. So it has to attack. It pretty much has to be on your front line, if you think about it. There's no way this can be on your back line and still attack. So in a sense, you're boosting frontline units to gain its attack. Of course, this could be strong, but at 6 cost, what kind of setup would this deck be? It's always the question at high cost cards. How do you get to the point where this card becomes useful? It's easy to imagine those cases for low cost cards, but at high cost cards, the variable just increased dramatically. So I don't know if this buff will make any major changes to this card. Potentially you could have played some sort of combo card. Dongzhuo comes in mind, where you could play a bunch of short swords in the front with Yellow Turban Rebellion, or maybe with cell swords. That way you have a decent front line at a potentially cheap cost. Then you throw this in, but this doesn't have fast. So that combo has to take place during potentially 2 turns. Of course, you could get the card, there's an event card that can give a card fast, and perhaps that's how you have to use this card, because then you can have a very surprise turn of very high damage. But once again, it takes a lot of setup, so I don't know how I feel about this card. But this card has always had some potential, just now it has a little bit more potential because it's seeing very little use, therefore it's getting a very small buff. Then we have a legendary card, the Huskars, and the card that, oh, it's not legendary, it's epic. It's a Viking card. It's now 9/7, whereas it used to be 8/7. And this card gives itself shield, and when it dies, adjacent allies will gain shield. It's never been a bad card in my opinion. I think this card could use Raid, and then you'll see a lot of play. But since it is an epic card, not a legendary card, you could have many copies of this card in your deck. Perhaps Raid would be too strong if you have a consistent way of summoning that. Because 9/7 with shield, just like we talked about with Cataphract, shield gives you a lot of survivability. It ruins a lot of combos for removals, and in this case, this is a strong card because you can also give adjacent allies shield that could include your general, which gives you even more survivability. So another pretty interesting card that they're buffing. Seeing too little play, but perhaps the reason why this sees little play is because it's epic. So not a lot of people have this card, like myself. Then another card that is legendary this time is the legendary Lu Bu, who has always had a very interesting ability. Whenever your general triggers last gasp, this will switch side. So this is an ode to the fact that Lu Bu has switched multiple masters in his life, in history. Now, he has 2 actions, plus 2 actions, so total of 3 actions. He used to be 5/12, so he could deal 5 damage 3 times to up to 3 targets in any given turn. And the best time to play him was perhaps in a Dongzhuo deck, where you hit your last gasp, then you used a decamp to heal yourself back up. And after that, you can't trigger a last gasp ever again. Therefore, you can use Lu Bu without ever worrying about losing him. Now, of course, even if you lost him in the past, you can hit your opponent to make them last gasp, and Lu Bu will bounce right back to you. It's always been a very fun card, and this 1 extra damage is basically 3 extra damage for him, as he can do 3 times 6 damage. And with 12 health, he is actually quite sturdy. Pretty interesting card. I don't know if he's going to see more play with this 1 damage change, as I think most of the reason why people don't play him is he has high cost and also he's legendary, so not many people have this card. And I don't know how efficiently they can test the changes if not many people have the cards. Then we have another rework on Marshal Ney, and he famously led the charge at Waterloo that lost him the battle, and he was still a cavalry focused card. Previously he was 1/6 with a bonus that says for each plan card in hand you get +3 attack. Now he's 3/6 himself, so a little bit stronger, and if he dies, if he shatters, then he will deploy a Lancer for each plan card in hand. Now Lancer is a strong card. It's 6/3 cavalry with flanking, and if you could spawn multiple ones from Marshal Ney or Ni, you'll do quite well. And it's an interesting card, I think. I don't know how efficient this would be in a deck, because the idea of having multiple planned card planned in your hand is rather difficult. The one complaint I have against French Republic cards, which has the plan card as their keyword, plan. Only one of their generals, Napoleon, have plan on their signature card. I feel like Marie Antoinette and Davout should also have planned on their signature card. This way they have more planned cards available to them. Now understand that currently they're designed pretty well in terms of Marie Antoinette, but maybe on Davout it can be, if card is planned, play 2 Palisade, which wouldn't break the game, because that means you had to not play it on the turn before a Daybreak, and then you get 2 the next time for cost of 2. So there's still efficiency in there, and it gives this card something else to trigger from, which I think is key. Now, moving on, they buffed another card which I think they don't need to buff, and that's the War Elephant. Used to be a 6/10, has stun, damaged, it has splash. Very strong card. If you ran this in your deck, it's a monster in the late game. There's not many things who can stop 10 health units. It has been buffed to 12 health, which scratches my head because things that were taking this down were not direct damage cards. You were not killing an elephant at 10 health. You were destroying the card, whether through some sort of usurp the throne type of card or blast, something that's a direct removal of a card rather than dealing 10 damage to a card. I don't know why boosting 2 health even mattered on this card. It does make this even stronger and more attractive. The 10 cost is a little scary, but if you're running one of those decks where you're just competing stat checks once you reach the late game, having a splash damage card at 612 is very powerful, because high cost powerful cards have the weakness of getting swarmed, as you can only attack one target per turn, so the enemy could potentially still beat you down by just offering something for you to hit every turn. But if you have Splash, you just crush pretty much 3 cards at one time and nothing scares you. So very strong card with stun as well. So I feel like War Elephant has always been good. In my opinion, if I had the card, I would run it in some decks, but now it becomes even stronger. Then we move on to another card that saw change because of the addition of Davout, and that is the Wild Geese, which is another card I don't have. This card used to be, whenever you play an event or gain extra supplies, it will gain +1/+1. It was 2/4. And a lot of players enjoy making great combos with this card, as you could play out a lot of supply gains through supply wagons or some other form of supply catch from Vineyard, and events are also supply catches, so you could double down on that. Now it's been changed to fill your hand with round shots and supply catches. I haven't seen this in action. I don't know if it's a random draw each time per card, or half and half, or some other sort of mechanic they're using, but pretty much this will fill up your hand. That's the purpose of this card when it gets shattered. It's 8 cost 3/3 to fill up your hand, and that's really play into Davout as a very consistent late game card to boost your hand size. Now of course, do you really want 6 supply catch and 6 round shot? Depends, but it's a pretty interesting card. If you also run cards like Scribe, all your supply cache and round shots basically turn to card draws, so that's also very interesting. I feel it's going to be essential for a deck like Davout in the late game, because sometimes you do want to play your hand, and you can't just wait every single game to get 9 cards, and this is a consistent way of boosting your hand size. And lastly, the next change is a card I actually have, and also a 3 Kingdom card, in terms of Xiaohodun got buffed. He used to be 1/6 with the same effect, now he's 1/7. And I always thought Xiaohodun can be played in a lot of decks, because he only costs 4. He's one of the few legendary cards that cost very little, and I always felt there's a value to that, because once you played the card, it's gone from your reserve. Legendary only has 1 copy. So in that sense, you can use Messenger more effectively, because it limits the number of total cards you have, and you can draw your more useful card at a higher percentage, even though a smaller high percentage. But if you run multiple legendary in a deck, you can actually control your messenger draws quite well. So given its 4 cost and this small buff, I feel like he will see some play. 1/7 is pretty good. I might put him in some Total deck, because if you have a mid-range deck, this is very, very good. And then there were other balance changes to generals and some other cards. Agamemnon is now only 22 health rather than 25. This does not change him one bit. I think he was a monster at 25. He's still a monster at 22. Sure, you might lose some close games you otherwise might have won before, but he is just so consistent at able to snipe away the enemy back line and then filter through both of his lines to get heals from campfire. He's still going to be insane. And I feel like if you design the deck to be a little bit more passive with campfire instead of all aggro, he will still thrive in the current meta as one of the top generals in the game. I still personally think he is the best general in the game, and Davout definitely does not change that. Then on top of that, some of the new cards we got last time got changed. We have the Border Guard going from 2/2 to 1/3 for survivability, and Torchbearer also went from 2/2 to 1/3. It's a theme. 3 health apparently is the new magic health number, because there's a lot of 2 damage removals, Stray Arrow, Trample, so giving things 3 health makes them survive better. Torchbearer is now 1/3 instead of 2/2. These are all passive ability cards, therefore they want to have more survivability on that. Another card is the Inexperienced Footman, which used to be 3/2. Now it's 2/3. So it actually gets more survivability. This is not a bad card in my opinion. Even before, if you could time this card well, before it was basically 4/3. If you play this on turn 3, it flies into turn 4, goes through Daybreak, and you get a 4/3 unit on the turn that it can attack. So it's not terrible. But now I think it's maybe even better, because you're getting a 3/4 unit that could potentially survive through another Daybreak. Since it is a timeless card, certain Daybreak deck, perhaps a Priam deck, could benefit from this card quite a lot, as you can also keep it alive longer with Priam's passive ability. So it's one of those very interesting cards, in my opinion, that could see more play because of this very minor change. Now, of course, it doesn't really belong in any type of style, not really aggro, not really mid-range, not really late game. So it could be still awkward to put the card in, but I do think the card itself has some value. Then we also have some other changes to some very less rarely seen cards. Fairing. So Fairing's a very fun card. I only ran into one deck that features this card, and I think it's actually quite interesting. So it's a ship card for Vikings, and ship meta, as we mentioned many times before, is not here yet. We need more ship cards, especially for the Vikings. Maybe when we get another Viking general, we might see more ship cards, and ship meta might come. But right now, what this card does is when you herald, when you play it, or when you move it through movement, ships in your hand will cost 1 less this turn. So this was 2 costs before, now it's 1 cost. And there could be ways where you can play all your ships for free if you combine things like Stone Bridge, which lowers units by 2 cost. And if we look at ships in particular, it has always been the combo with Galley, where you can play Galley by heralding it, target a friendly unit, add a 1/1 copy of that unit that costs 1 to your hand. If you had Stonebridge active and you had another Galley on board, the second Galley you play could summon a clone of your first Galley that only costs 1 with this same herald ability, which would cost 0 if you have Stonebridge, allowing you to play an entire board full of Galleys on the turn you play Galley. It's a very, very interesting combo. It might be hard to explain, but you can just think about it. If you have Galley and Stonebridge on board, and you draw another Galley, you play the Galley, you target your current Galley on the board with it, which gives you a 1/1 cost Galley into your hand. And then that Galley, because of Stonebridge, will be free to play, because it costs 1, reduced 2, it's actually -1, but that's 0 cost. You play that card, targeting your current Galley again, and repeat until your whole board is filled with Galleys, and you still have a leftover Galley in hand. So that's a very interesting combo there. And that's some potential for ship deck in the future. We already have quite a few ships, not gonna lie, but we need more. This is not gonna make a deck. None of them are very strong. As you can see, we don't even have a epic ship in the game. We have one, but it's for Empire, and then there's one for Troy that's legendary. And while we're here, let's talk about this. Fall of Troy has been a very buggy card, but it's now 4 cost instead of 3. It's a very particular playstyle, which I think is very interesting. When you play this card, it's an event card, you deploy a unit, the Trojan Horse, on the enemy side. And then once this gets killed and shattered, everything in your hand gets played, because the enemy becomes you, because you played it on your enemy's side of the board. And then you flood out the board with all your strong, powerful cards, and it's game over. Or you think it's game over. And that could happen with a very interesting playstyle on day 1. And they kind of wanted to stop that from happening when it cost 3. But now it costs 4. So that's another very small change. And then what's really shocking for me is that they actually changed Fog from 1 cost to 0 cost. The rationale being Fog was rarely seen to be played, so they want you to use it. It stuns everything with range. It's good. It's particularly good in decks that runs Scribe, because once again it becomes a 0 cost event card that can help you draw. But it counters decks like Davout, who wants to use short range very, very much, and he can't run it himself because you can't use this because it stuns your own range unit as well. So it's quite conflicting. Like, I would want to run this card in Davout because I would run Scribe in Davout, but then I would sacrifice all my range cards by stunning them myself. So that's tough. I don't know if this is the solution. The problem is there's a competing card with this. So you might think Fog is very good anti-range. Well, there's better anti-range card. Namely, where is it? I don't want to miss it. It summons a bunch of nomadic calves. Is it 3 cost? Flank charge. There it is. 3 cost flank charge, deploy a Normat cavalry for every range enemy. This is very strong now, especially as people experiment with Davout decks. You earthwork battery, a bunch of short range foot artilleries come out, you play flank charge, you get much more value than they did from their artillery. So that's why I think artillery Davout is probably not a solution right now. There's just way too many cards that could combo them and beat them pretty easily. So that's another card. And this I feel like competes with Fog, because if you have a situation where Fog is very efficient, flank charge is even more efficient. So that's my opinion. And then another slight buff is to General's Bodyguard, which I can get to pretty easily here. Right here. It gone from 9 cost to 8 cost, and it has flanking, cost 1 less for each enemy unit. It's always been pretty easy to get this low cost. I just don't know when this card will be like super viable. I know there's deck that fights against giant mobs with this card, so I can see how this is a nice buff. And since it's timeless, I'm sure a lot of cards could use this, but this is, in my opinion, a pretty minor change. And then another change is to Trebuchet, which has gotten a nerf to its health, but also reduced cost. It used to be 5 cost 2/6, now it's 4 cost 2/5. And whenever it attacks, it deals 1 damage to any adjacent allies. I like this card. I feel like this card had potential in terms of a self-damaging deck to trigger raid, but there was just few things you wanted to play on your backline where this was useful, and often for a lot of raid decks, most of your cards are on the front line. So in a sense, this can be combo with Friary a little bit better, because I feel like that's the intention here. Friary is 1/5. Whenever this survives damage, you draw a card. You play this on your back line. You play the Trebuchet next to it, and each time you take 1 damage off of it to draw essentially 4 cards. That's quite strong. The only problem is they're on curve at the same slot. 4 cost, and Trebuchet is now 4 cost as well, whereas it was 5 cost. The better option is to have Trebuchet 3 cost with something like 2/4 or 1/4 even, because then you have a long range unit that can basically tick Friar. You play this the turn before, and by the time you play Friary, you get the attack available so that you can tick it down and draw a card right away. But that's the combo I think that exists in the game. And then the only other card that saw change was Rabble Risers, which I feel like it warrants a change. It used to be 5 cost 3/3, summons another copy during Daybreak. And this is a peasant card, so it would work in Marie Antoinette decks, as it can be buffed with other peasant-related cards. It wasn't seeing enough play because it wasn't consistently being triggered, and even when you trigger it, another 3/3 unit is not that strong. So 4/4 definitely much better, because if you play this right, you can essentially get 2/4/4 the very next turn for 5 cost. Not that bad. So this is a nice bonus. Whenever you can summon a copy and then you boost the stat, it's going to have more impact. So there is potential if I'm ever going to build a guillotine deck with Marie Antoinette, this will probably fit right in. And then we move back to the medieval era, as we have another self-damaging card. Herald, deal 1 damage to each adjacent unit, they gain +2 attack. Used to be they gained the 2 attack on that turn only. Now it's permanent attack increase. So definitely makes this card a lot stronger. It just wasn't seeing play because of the temporary effect and the punishing 1 damage. Now perhaps this will fit very well in a raid deck. The only question is, at 4 cost, most raid deck want to get rid of their hand, and this might just be a little bit too late on the curve. But the +2 attack is quite surprising. Essentially you're getting 4 additional damage on the turn that you play this, so that's definitely very useful in almost all instances. And I could see a situation where you might play this card on the back line where the Friary and the Trebuchet were both set up already. The second you play this, the Trebuchet takes 1 damage, becomes 4 attack, and the Friary takes 1 damage and you draw a card. And then you can move Flogger away to the front line the next turn, and you have a stronger Trebuchet, and you can still continue to draw a card with Friary. The only problem being, once again, they're all 4 cost. So they're competing, they're not on curve. So it's going to be very weird to play them. It'd be better if they're set up better on the curve so that you could play them in order. Perhaps you play your Trebuchet first, Friary second, Flogger third, on some sort of 3 cost, 4 cost, 5 cost curve, and then that combo becomes much more useful. And speaking of cost, we have a card that got changed, which I think deservedly so. Funeral Games got changed. Funeral Game spawns 2 chariots, and if it's heroic triggered, you get to draw 2 cards. It's so good that it's in every single one of my children decks. Chariots are insanely good. Very, very hard to deal with when you can get 2 of them for free instead of playing them. So this is still auto include, because it also draws 2 cards in the late game. If you're top decking, this will save you. If you're not top decking, it will just extend your advantage. So there is no drawback. Even at 10, I would gladly play it. Of course, it's going to be not as good as 9, but I don't think it hurts you. You are never really combining this card with another card. There was no other 1 cost card that you were playing with it, so it doesn't remove any potential combos. But in a sense, still very solid. Then a nerf, much deservingly, to the Headhunter. Headhunter was 3/3. It wanted to die. It had very high damage, same amount of health for 4. Now it's 2/4. So they increased its survivability, were lowering its damage, also lowering the amount of damage it would deal to enemy generals. Now the problem with this is, I can see the Headhunter still being extremely useful as a trading piece. Because you have 4 health now, it can stay alive longer, which actually help Pentathalia decks. Because now I have more opportunity to put my Blood Oath on it. I would play that on curve, play Headhunter. You would not really remove it right away, in my opinion. And then on turn 5, I give it Blood Oath. And then if you still don't kill it, more Blood Oath. So it's still very, very scary. And I feel like because of the design of the card, and currently there's no way to get rid of Shatter. That is the current problem. There is no way to deal with Shatter in the game. You can remove the card, but that's not really dealing with it. There must be a way for you to take away the Shatter effect, in my opinion, for these cards to get nerfed. Or else it's always going to be quite strong because it's kind of unpreventable. So that's my take on this. And then going along the theme of children cards, the Lycinian Stonemason has been nerfed, where it only gives +1/+1 to structures. I don't know how I feel about this. Sure, +2/+2 was strong, but structure deck as a whole has been not very popular, because it doesn't really stop aggro and can be bypassed by quite a bit of cards. So I don't know if it deserves a nerf, especially if you think about the other cards being changed in this patch. If we just quickly go to Trojan, we can see that Trojan Defender got 1 extra health because it wasn't being used. It's actually not that bad because it has stun, which many people don't realize. And it can also gain short range whenever you deploy a structure, which also gives you another short range stunner, which is pretty good in my opinion. And aside from that, another change is to Shrine of Hephaestus, which now has 6 health instead of 5. That's a boost to structure deck. So you have 2 buffs to structure and then 1 nerf, which kind of confused me of which way they actually want to go with this. Then if we get rid of the filter and we go back to our topic of ships, we have Trireme, which helps us draw a card. Used to be 6/4, that cost 6, and for survivability is now 5/5. I still don't know how I feel about ships. And clearly this really doesn't even belong in the ship meta because it's ancient card, and most of the combo ship cards are in medieval or Viking. So it doesn't benefit this card. It's not timeless. So it's still gonna have trouble seeing play. Obviously this is not a bad effect, and we complained once. The issue with this card is not the effect or the stat, it's the cost. 6 is not on curve for Daybreak, so it's rather inefficient to play this card. If it was 7 with better stats, or potentially 3 or 4 with worse stats, it would see more play, because you can consistently get that draw. So the problem I think is the cost and not the stats. Then we already talked about Trojan Defenders, and then we also have Veteran Trainer, which also seeing a change. And the change here is just a stat change. Used to be 4/6 with the same bonus, now it's 3/5, because I think this is fair. It was never really about how strong this card is. The value has always been the other unit you're boosting. So by reducing the health of this card and the attack of this card, it doesn't hurt people who want to run this card, but it also helps your opponent to have a way to get rid of this card a little bit better. Potentially against a crack shot, you can actually kill this with a crack shot, and a 6 health is pretty much untouchable. There's no direct damage card that will do 6 and remove it right away, so it does give it some more counters. It costs 7, so having a counter definitely makes it a little bit scary to play this card. And aside from that, we just have one small bug change, I guess. It's the Horde. The Centaur Horde now has flanking as it should, which makes it include in Pentathlea decks, because this can be a pretty good late game card that has a shatter effect, very hard to remove, similar to the Mycenaean Chariot, helps you counter a lot of range and structure deck, so I feel like that will get added into any current Pentathlea deck to increase your late game power. So that's about it. It's a big patch. We talked about a lot of things. I can't wait to play around the card, sense out what the new meta is, and have some new deck showcase this weekend. So I hope you guys enjoy this one, and see you all next time. Bye!